to go, finally. So this is some new material I've been working on. I'm sort of testing it today with you, so your questions or comments will always be totally welcome. Something I've just been thinking about is the question of sort of the impossible question that we wouldn't have thought of maybe in September, October, of Donald Trump becoming president of the United States, and how this has kind of opened up a lot of concern or question about things like civic education, civic engagement, critical reasoning, critical thinking, what it means to be a good member of a democracy, and what it means to be able to function in democracy, and also how do people buy into bad arguments, which is a very old question that a lot of people on the left are asking again now. So interest in debate and argumentation is very high right now, and it's almost sort of coming to reinvestigate old questions. I've been thinking about that a lot, and particularly as somebody whose primary job it is as a professor to direct a debate club, which is very normal in the United States for a professor to be assigned to this duty. What am I doing with this? Is what we've been doing this whole time still okay to do? Or do we now have a new ethical obligation to do something else? That's what the talk is going to investigate, these questions. So, in the United States, this is a very common sort of scene in all major cities. There have been mass mobilizations, and mass lectures, and mass demonstrations, and teach-ins, and all kinds of things against the Trump administration and against the alt-right, which has sort of come up with them, which is in the United States and also kind of the world, sort of it's what we call the sort of the new right-wing movements, who are very sort of fascist and racist, white supremacy kind of movements, where they talk about how American white culture is threatened by multicultural institutions and thoughts and things like that. And all of this activity has been happening under the banner of total resistance. You see this hashtag a lot. And I started to ask the question, what is total resistance? What would this look like? What's a way we can theorize total resistance? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought debate societies are in a unique place to really help theorize total resistance. Just based on what we normally do over the course of a weekend, there's a lot there in terms of total resistance. So let's look at a case study of what total resistance looks like. And here are the questions that I sort of already spoke about. This cartoon sort of sums up some of the, one of the great examples. The example I'll go into detail is that in January of the Oval Office, the President Trump started issuing all of these executive orders, which are directives from the President about how things are going to go. Presidents write these all the time. Most of the time they're ignored. And when they leave office, they write tons and tons and tons of them that are often very strange. And we don't hear much about them. There's some famous executive orders that people know about, such as Bill Clinton's executive order about Somalia, which meant that the United States couldn't intervene in Rwanda, which said that the United States will only intervene in foreign countries when their own existential interests, direct threat to them is at stake, then the military will intervene. And no president has declined to act on that order. Only another president can invalidate an executive order. That's the only thing that can do it. Or it could be ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. That's another way. So this political cartoon shows how one of the executive orders was that the Department of the Interior, the Environmental Protection Agency, and all kinds of different cabinet positions in the federal government were issued a gag order by the president. You're not allowed to speak to the media. You're not allowed to make any public statements about anything. And you're not allowed to give out any funding or make any new initiatives. All planning will cease. All funding and grants will cease. And you're going to wait for new directives from the new person to get into office. And this happened while all of his cabinet picks were being confirmed. So there was a little bit of an insurrection in the National Park Service. The forest rangers, the people who operate our national parks, declined to accept this rule, and they formed alternative Twitter accounts. NASA did the same thing. There's Alt NASA and Alt National Park Service to troll the president. So this cartoon references that, where he says, listen to me. And then you have the park ranger from the Badlands, who's the one who started it. They put badass lines, right? The Badlands who said that they're just going to tweet whatever they want about the president and about things like global warming. So the National Park Service on their alt Twitter account started tweeting the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every day. Just repeatedly. defying the gag order, but doing it in a way that is legally questionable. Here's a snapshot of the alt-US Park Service and the kind of things that they tweet about. Unofficial resistance team of U.S. National Park Service, not taxpayer subsidized. Come from rugged scenery, fossil beds, and 89 million acres of landscape. That's their description. I think it's pretty funny. But I think this is kind of the sense of what we get of what total resistance would look like. This became sort of the paradigmatic rhetorical position that people expected to take, which is, we're going to oppose you, we're not going to do what you want, we're going to do the opposite of what it is that you want, and we're going to continue to do it through ways that disturb and sort of upset you. Where do we go from here is sort of the question. The National Park Service continued to sort of tweet this out, but it's kind of fallen off of the mediascape. But these alternative sort of tweet, the president uses Twitter all the time. So these alternative kind of tweet stream is kind of a question about where do we go from here? What does this mean for other forms of resistance, and how do people take this up? One of the ways that we can think about this is through metaphor. And I think about metaphor a lot because I'm a rhetorician and I teach rhetoric and I study rhetoric. So one of the metaphors is like, if park rangers are resisting, people might read it in terms of what park rangers normally do, and that's fight fires. So this is a good example of how much of the budget of the National Park Service is sort of consumed, it's kind of a bad pun, with fighting forest fires. And it continues to go up and up and up. It's one of the largest things they're responsible for doing is preventing the forest from burning. And so the fire metaphor really took off when the internet sort of got a hold of the alt Park Service tweets, and they started to think of total resistance in the terms of, well, this would be normal work for park rangers. They're protecting us just like they would protect us from fire. The other thing that the Park Service does is fire education. This is a character that's every American recognizes this character. Smokey the Bear, who's our character to warn people not to be careful with fire and not to play with matches. Don't play with matches are not a toy. Fire is not a toy, kids. And let's protect, and he has all these animal friends. And they're like, please don't burn down our house. And they say things like this to the children, and the children are like, okay, not today. Whatever the response might be. And this character is part of the National Park Service and even wears the distinctive hat that the forest rangers wear in the national park. So Smokey the Bear is a character that indicates fire prevention. So you have firefighting and fire prevention as the normal activities of the park rangers. And all of this gets folded in when the internet kind of takes off of this. So here are a couple of things the internet did as far as memes go, which are sort of graphic representations of arguments that are very interesting to study. This is a poster from long ago from the Department of the Interior where someone has just edited it, worth fighting for, and it shows the burned forest and the park ranger. Help your park ranger prevent lies. So this original poster says fires. So this is edited in a way to show that what the metaphor does, people are trying to bring it together and say, look, there's not much distinction between what a park ranger usually does and what they're doing now. They're preventing us from losing all of this valuable stuff here behind them. And this is what the landscape looks like. Over here we have Smokey the Bear, normally a very peaceful, child-friendly character with resist, and his hand is on fire, quite literally. And he's also in the distinctive pose that Americans would recognize as the sign of dissent from the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, where when the black athletes won and the national anthem played, instead of saluting the flag and singing like they should do, they put their heads down and did the symbol of black power, which is what Smokey the Bear is doing, the symbol of black power. The prototypical symbol of resistance to the government and resistance to the culture. I find this image to be incredibly powerful and incredibly weird and incredibly funny, but it shows how people will take the metaphor and try to make it work and blend it and say, look, they're really doing sort of normally what they're doing. So it's just a couple of the images that we see. So the metaphor of fire is where we're going to go now, and how does the metaphor of fire work in our daily lives? Fire is a very powerful thing. And metaphorically, there's lots of ways to think about it. And in speech and persuasion and debate, it comes up a lot. We have fiery discourse. So you would say the politicians are speaking very fiery words. Got heated in there, or a heated parliamentary session. A fire and brimstone speech we get from Protestant Christianity. Fire and brimstone preachers. Preachers who preach, damnation, gloom and doom, all that kind of stuff. You're going to hell, that kind of thing. You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. Any free speech theorist and every single debater on earth has said this at least once, maybe 20,000 times. This is a metaphor as well for danger. You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater is a metaphor for danger. Or a metaphor for danger as encapsulated in free speech theory. Then we also have people spitting fire, like contemporary hip-hop. Then we have those fire bars. That song is full of fire bars, or that song contains fire bars. You hear people talk like this. So fire is this powerful element. It's not necessarily always destructive. It's threatening and it's powerful. But the one thing that's interesting is here, it can be transformative, and here, it can be creative, which I think is odd to think about when you think about fire as being. Is there something else?
Just like, is it okay to ask questions, right? What does cannot show fire in appropriate theater mean?
Oh, okay. So in free speech, that's a good question. So in free speech theory, in the United States, the paradigmatic phrase that gets repeated all the time about where your free speech limits stop is you are not able to create a clear and present danger with your free speech. So the metaphor is you cannot go into a crowded theater and say, fire, fire, people get trampled and hurt. You say, look, I was just expressing my opinion. You cannot do that. It's against the law. Now this, of course, changes a bit when you get to things like hate speech. It's become, it's a little more difficult. But that has been sort of the governing metaphorical phrase for the limits of free speech, not only in free speech scholarship, but also in the popular opinion or understanding of the limits of free speech, as I can't cause direct harm to you with my speech.
So I actually heard that this phrase, you cannot shout fire at the theater, was itself just a metaphor. So it was used in some kind of, so it's a good example of when you shouldn't use your speech for just anything.
Mm-hmm.
But what I heard is that it actually came up in some kind of court ruling where somebody was actually punished for advocating against the US taking part in one of the world wars or something like that. So they were basically disseminating pacifist ideals, and that was compared to shouting fire in a crowded theater, which is kind of, it seems like kind of an abuse of the term, right? Because people should be able to advocate against taking part in the war. That's what it's like. Like, to me, that doesn't seem like a directly destructive thing, but it was destructive.
Yeah, to me either. The United States at wartime is a funny thing. Every time we've had a war, we immediately suspend the Constitution, right? So there's this thing called the Alien and Sedition Acts that always appear every time we have a war. And so in World War II, you couldn't say something like sauerkraut. In World War I, sauerkraut means, he used a German word thrown in prison. It might be a German collaborator. So they had to rename it Liberty Cabbage. Yeah, and the hot dogs, Frankfurters, they used to call them Frankfurters, the German sausages. You can't say that. You have to say victory steak or something like that. I don't know. I don't like these names very much. But it kind of got lampooned in the after 9/11 when we started to do the Afghani war and proposed the Afghani war, and the French government was against the idea of going in for regime change in Afghanistan and Iraq. People started saying, well, we shouldn't call it French fries anymore, we should call it freedom fries. Lampooning the old, you might remember some of that, but that was sort of a joke, lampooning sort of our popular memory and our popular imagination's memory about the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien and Sedition Acts, I think, were first put into place in the U.S. Civil War, with the suspension of habeas corpus and other kinds of civil rights and stuff like that. I'm not a historian, that's what I remember from reading way too many history books in my spare time. But yeah, it is important. I think what you said is very important, that this itself is a metaphor, and they could have picked anything they want, but fire isn't. It's incredibly powerful rhetorical properties to the image or the idea or the rhetorical valence of fire. Okay, so fire for our current administration also has a lot of application. The phrase "you're fired," right? Which comes from this poor gentleman here, Thomas Watson Sr. He was an executive in the National Cash Register Company, which was run by John Henry Patterson. That's this guy's name. John Henry Patterson liked to express his dislike with his executives by sending them off on a meeting, which he did to Thomas Watson Sr., and then he had the junior executives drag their desk out in front of the company, they douse it with gasoline and set it on fire. And then when you come back to your desk flaming in front of the building, you realize you're no longer wanted there, you've been fired. This is the origin of this phrase, which also explains why Americans say you're fired or not, you've been been sacked like the British do. And being sacked like the British, that means they hand you, like a journeyman, they give you your sack of tools to be on your way. You're no longer working here, here's your sack. In America, we got it from this crazy man here. Thomas Watson Sr. was, of course, upset by being fired, but he did okay. He went on and found a little company called International Business Machines. He's okay. IBM, he's okay. Don't worry about him. He did all right for himself. His mom's proud. And then the president is primarily known for a reality show where he says we want fire as his new catchphrase. So there's a lot of fire metaphor coming from the other side here as well. So we're surrounded by fire as we get into the analysis. So I want to take the fire metaphor a little deeper, and I looked into the way park rangers talk about fire, and people who do the planning for the parks talk about fire. And there are 3 different positions one can have about fire in relation to the forest. And I think this is the root of what total resistance ought to be. Total resistance might be thought of as suppression of destructive argumentation. Like we just put it out, like we're an extinguishing paradigm. Whatever they say, we're going to go against it, we're going to snuff it out, we're going to dump tons of water from helicopters on it. You've all seen this on the news. When we have forest fires, we don't play around. We see these helicopters with big buckets and they, put it out. Or we can say total resistance is the control of argument discourse to prevent the damage caused by argument. This second position is the Smokey the Bear position, the fire education position, which would be fire is useful and valuable in the right hands. Right? This would be what I would call the good liberal position, or the moderate Democrat in the U.S. position, which is it's okay for me to use fire, but not okay for the Republicans. Right? Only the right kinds of people can make arguments as long as they say the right kind of thing. Right? So this is like, it's fun to have a campfire and sing around it and camp out. You should put it out carefully, and some people don't understand how to use it. So we either need to educate them about how to argue better and use logic and reason better, or we need to take it away from them. And then the final one is that total resistance requires a new relationship to the total articulation of arguments. And that's the one that I think debate societies can help with the most. These two are very sort of status quo. Either an argument breaks out, people are like, guys, don't fight, this is not productive, let's just not talk about Trump. Let's just not talk about it. This is terrible, which is not what you want in the democratic order. You'd want people talking about it and having ways and methods of talking about it. This one is only the right people can talk about it. So when people admit an opinion that doesn't sound the way it should in the proper sort of debate-ese, if that's a language, then people will just kind of scoff. Yeah, here you go again, whatever. And they don't really want to hear it, so it's like the damaging or drainage one. Then I think total resistance is a very complicated sort of idea, so let's get into that. So these are the 3 perspectives I just sort of covered, and I also named them the suppression perspective, the education and corrective perspective, also the debate perspective, which is why we would have so many debate competitions, is this idea that we're teaching people how to be better at controlling fire and using fire productively. Then the final one is the rhetorical perspective, which is fire as natural and productive, as natural as the trees in the forest, which is the perspective of the fire ecologist, which I'll get into. So, some of the things to know about fire suppression. Here's a dramatic photo of fighting forest fires in California a couple of years ago. A total extinguishing. There can be nothing good about the presence of fire, a total elimination of it. We need something else. In the United States, this is often referred to as what they call the discourse and deliberation movement, or the discourse and discussion movement, which is a movement to completely divest from argumentation and debate, which are harmful, destructive barriers to getting things done in democracy. And there are a lot of people who take this position. So I will propose, let's have a debate about this or that issue on the campus, and other faculty will say, why don't we just have a discussion instead? Why the hate? Why all the anger? Or instead of debating it in Congress, why can't we just discuss it and come to different, or why can't we have deliberation? So these forms of discourse are always competing with each other in the public sphere. It also is associated with kind of a philosophy of purity, that we could have a world without fire, that we could have a world where things don't burn, that we could have a world where everyone would just say the right thing, where we could have that sort of pure form. I think a lot of people like that fantasy quite a bit. Fire can never be good. It is a destructive force, and it's unnatural as opposed to the trees or the forest. The fire is the invader. The fire is the usurper. It doesn't belong in the forest. The trees and the rabbits and the deer belong there. But the fire is not a part of the forest. And this is this is an older perspective that forest rangers might take. I don't know how many of them would take it now. but this was sort of the colonial perspective in terms of settlers in the United States moving west, encountering Native Americans who thought fire was a natural part of the environment and actually supported it and kept fires burning, and they were like, it's fine. Whereas our perspective as we moved, colonizers moved west, was to put it out at every time. Same thing in Australia as well. The Aborigines would use fire all the time to sort of attract game or do all kinds of things with it, and we would just be like, no, put it out. The fire prevention corrective is one that's summarized with the phrase, well, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Or prefaced with phrases like, well, uneducated people think like this. Or people who don't know think like this. Or people who aren't debaters think like this. People who haven't access like this. This kind of sort of snooty kind of discourse where you sort of make a judgment between different classes of people based on exposure to different things. And debate becomes a kind of a training, right? A way of learning how to do something extant. As opposed to what I'm about to get into as a contrast, not a creative force. Not a force that makes or makes new or interrupts the normal ideological discourses of politics, but one that trains you how to step into, like a new pair of shoes, the extant political discourses available for you in your country. A conservative understanding of debate is what I'd also call this. And servile debating, which is a phrase I've used in some of my other work, which is a theory that debate doesn't do much else other than give us access to the knowledge produced in other discourses. Debate is a great way to access political discourse. Debate is a great way to access philosophical discourse. Debate is a great way to access the discourses of economics. Debate is a great way to access the discourse of science. Debate is a great way to access the discourse of history, and on and on and on and on. But debate doesn't produce any knowledge. It just gives us a way of becoming familiar with knowledge produced by experts who are elsewhere. And often during the tournament, the experts are never around. It's very ironic because we're in a university. Their offices are all around us. We're debating things people spend 20, 30 years of their life studying, and they're never present. Why do we not think to ask them to come? Why do we not think to ask them to come? Because servile debate, we don't need the knowledge makers there. We can just, this is like putting on clothes instead of making your own clothes. This kind of perspective. The education corrective perspective also comes with it the attitude that one can make judgments about other people's arguments based on form alone. So this would be the history of the fallacies, for example. Somebody makes an argument, you can address it by saying, well, you made a fallacy, so I don't have to deal with it beyond that. Right? This is sort of servile kind of conservative debate, conservative theory of debate, which would be, I can use the fire, you can't. Or I can use the fire safely and you can't use it safely. So, fire ecology, the one I love the most, brings up major questions about debate's relationship to modern discourses at the university as well. And one is a large shift among faculty across many fields, which is what are we interested in at the university? What's the goal of having the university? Why do we have students? Why do we teach at all? Why can't we all just sit and research all day? Wouldn't that be lovely? No classes to teach, just read, type, go to conferences. Wow, that'd be nice. But there has to be some reason to have students, yes? Yes, yes. Okay, everyone's quiet, maybe nervous. I'm just kidding, it's fine. Process versus product. Are we here to embrace the doing of something, or the studying of something, or get something down? Or are we here to create something, or make something? So the process versus product debate is most centered in the United States university context under writing instruction. And it's really heated in those fields. Are we supposed to make the students good academic writers, good professional writers? Or are we supposed to make them comfortable on their own terms with the act of writing? And make them writers every day? And make them think of writing as something more than just communicating information, but a way of being, a way of existing, and something I have to do. So there's a fight between these sort of very creative kind of forces versus these more professionalization kind of forces. And it's kind of all over the university. Are we making people, and this is also the neoliberal rhetoric of the university, which is, are we making people to go get good jobs and good careers? Every university in the world can provide you pages of statistics of what the average income is, the median income of their students, and where do they work. And you get brochures with nice pictures of people in suits, like I work here at the government, I work here in this private industry. I did my degree in 3 years, this kind of thing. Or is this about learning how to think and inhabiting a style of thinking and being do every day of one's life. Now, these are not necessarily mutually exclusive options. At all, they can work together. For now, they're kind of pitted against each other. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Ooh. Okay. This perspective, fire ecology perspective, raises the question, what counts as natural and therefore good? So there's this connection between the natural and the good that we picked up from the Enlightenment. The ancient Greeks did not think this way. The ancient Greeks divided the world into physis and nomos, and said, Aristotle says, the good is when people or animals or creatures are where they can maximize life. It's a different model of freedom than what we have in consumer capitalist culture. Like my freedom, I determine based on how many flat screen televisions I can have in my house. Like, what can I buy? How many times can I go out to dinner? I have a life, right? But Aristotle had a different sense where he would say, the freedom to maximize your state, maximize, be your entire unus, right? Maximize your state. So for him, a fish in a tank or in a bowl is not in its correct environment. It needs to be in the lake or the river or the sea. And people need to be into politics. They need to be in the political realm. If you live as a hermit out in the woods, like some Buddhist theorists would say is the right way to live, Aristotle would reject that. So you're not in the right place. You need to be in the city, in the polis. That's where you can maximize yourself because you're a political animal. And the ancient Greeks had lots of different political animals. Aesop's fables about the fox as the good persuader. You know, lots of foxes here this weekend in Budapest, right? The good persuaders, tricky language, all that. And then you have the other political animal, the octopus, who is multicolored, polykolos, multicolored. He can move to his surroundings and things like that. That's another political animal for the Greeks, right? They feature in their stories about manipulation and persuasion quite a bit.
And Pareto also, Wilfredo Pareto also said about foxes and lions. He's putting almost the same paradigm like the Greeks, but he said about the elites, saying that there are elites that they behave like foxes, very shy, and the lions that
yeah, the lion, there's no shyness there.
yeah.
By force and by noise and by presence, that kind of thing.
Trump.
Yeah, right. Yeah, very much so.
Isn't there a certain problem when we talk about natural and therefore good? Like this kind of mechanic doesn't necessarily apply to humans because we're actually able to do unnatural things. Animals usually are not.
Right. Yeah, that's why I'm critiquing this. I don't agree with this at all.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is when you take a fire ecology perspective or the rhetorical perspective, this becomes immediately questionable. But this is sediment from the Enlightenment. It's like if I can get closer to the natural world, if I can understand what the great clockmaker of God or the great mathematician of God has put into the leaves of the soil, it's almost kind of like the scientific, not the scientific, but the scientistic perspective, which is the popularization of scientific reasoning through capitalist media norms. People like Neil deGrasse Tyson and people like Bill Nye, who have doing incredible harm to scientific thinking because of the way that they popularize scientific ideas. They do it in a way that's consumerist in logic rather than scientific in logic. That's another talk for another day. But this kind of a thing is one of the basics of sort of enlightenment science, which has been critiqued by the history of science, philosophy of science community in big ways. If I get closer to the natural, I'm getting closer to the good. If I live a natural life, I'm living a good life. Look at the sort of the moral rhetoric you get from vegans and paleo dieters, right? I am closer to the way humans should live because historically and biologically we live this way. Right? These rhetorics are incredibly powerful and persuasive. So persuasive that you can't argue against them using rationality and reason, really. You just accept them as, oh, that's true. Right? So there's two different big modes of persuasion. One is, wow, that was a great speech. Your arguments are very well warranted. You have great evidence. Wow, that was very persuasive. I give you a 1. That's one way to be persuasive. The other way is, he's right. That's just true. That's just true. And that's all the audience can say about it. Which camp would you like to be in? I'd like to be in the, wow, that's just true. That's just right. So there's one level of persuasion where you sort of are doing and then there's the other one where you're just like, boom, right? So lots to think about there. So the fire ecologist says, what's natural in this photo? This, the grass, the smoke, the trees, it's all natural. This is something that happens in the forest, and it's part of the forest. One of the things they point to is a lot of forests in the United States and elsewhere have animals and plants that have adapted to fire. So in the United States, we have trees where the seeds will not come out of the pine cones. They drop the pine cones. But the seeds won't come out and germinate unless the pine cone is heated to some incredibly high temperature. Because then the fire has come, it's created the fertilizer, it's burned out all the plants that would shade it and prevent the tree from growing, so now it's time for it to germinate. So fire actually helps the forest repopulate itself. Other animals will decide to hibernate, like certain kinds of turtles in Australia, or certain kinds of field mice in the United States will decide to move and go to breeding grounds and things like that, based on the amount of kindling they can find around, like, oh, fire's going to time to go. And then also this question of living with. We have to live with fire. We can't eliminate fire. We can't have a perspective of purity. And we also can't really control fire. And if we control fire, we're harming the forest. We're harming nature when we try to control fire. So we need to respect fire and live with it in a way. And I think this model is actually what I think total resistance looks like, because it doesn't fall into this sort of bifurcation, tit for tat sort of model of I'm just going to go against everything you say, like we see the fire ranger metaphor leaning towards. So, debate society resistance plan. Here are my controversial political statements that we'll talk about as far as debate societies coming on board with sort of the fire ecology perspective of living with the messiness of debate and argumentation and rhetoric. That is not the inheritance of the Enlightenment. The ideas of logic, or the ideas of rationality, or the ideas of logical positivism, which circulate and have wonderful, great lives in debate. It's kind of like a retirement home for these ideas, because in most fields, these ideas have sort of been abandoned for more sort of fluid, more sort of moving back towards this sort of humanistic sense. Different things we can think of. So the first one is stop saying public debates and start saying circuit debates. What do I mean by this? We call debate something that I think we should call circuit debate or competitive debate. It's a form of debate that really only appeals to certain people who like a certain kind of competition, phrased a certain way, and it's very rewarding and fun for them. But it's dangerous. It's a dangerous kind of fire, because it easily conflates itself with the way debate should look. It comes with normative claims. So when you watch political debates in your country, or you watch political debates in the media, you're more apt to completely dismiss them, because they don't look refined enough. They don't look right. They're not done the right way. In the United States, we often will do public debates because debate societies are connected with faculty and are connected with departments. And so oftentimes we will do debates that will connect with some controversial issue going on in the campus of the world. And we'll invite the public there. And sometimes you hear the rhetoric of this sort of problem come out. When audience members are like, why did you talk about this or that issue? It doesn't seem very relevant to me. And they say, well, if you understood debate, you would know that as my speaking position, I have to bring a new argument in. And this is the new argument that I bring in because it doesn't knife this team, and you start speaking in the terms of the circuit debate or the competitive debate. And the audience members, they don't say you're wrong, they just say, oh, okay. And in their head they say, well, debate is not for me. So this distances us from our ethical responsibility of showing people that they can be debaters. We do our circuit competitive debate, that's fine. Keep doing it. Wonderful, it's great. Have great giant IVs where people vote on. We had like 5 slides about what you can and can't say at the beginning of this competition. Like if the motion has this word in it, it's almost like a logic, almost like a circuit breaker. Right? It's like if the motion says would, here are the 5 things you can't. It's almost like, it's like the dream of logical positivist discourse corrective theorists, right? To be like, let's get rid of the messiness of language and have something really pure. And that way we'll have good debates. But good debates for who is always the question for the rhetorician. Good debates for who? The debate in the parliament here in Hungary, those arguments wouldn't influence an American. I mean, some of them would, but they wouldn't need to. They wouldn't necessarily need to reach that audience. Arguments are best curtailed for the audience that they're supplied to. So I would say let's make the circuit debate and identify that with the rhetoric of being the smaller. And then let's talk about debate as a general public thing that everyone can participate in, and start sort of having, welcoming in people from the street and saying, let's do a debate for you, what do you think? And trying to speak in their way. That way you're getting two different kinds of language going on as well. This is the big fight, at least in the US, between people who want to do fire prevention or fire curtailment and people who want to do fire ecology, like me. And so, okay, next. I think my battery might be dead. Well, it's kind of slow. Here's the next thing we have to say to ourselves. BP debate is the format chosen by the World University Debate Championship, but it is not determined by the World University Debate Championship. That means that BP debating, the kind of style of debate that we do, can be our own. We can do what we want with it. Why does every competition, and why does everything we do, have to follow what Worlds does? Worlds doesn't govern us. They're not the ones collecting the registration money. They're not the ones setting up the tournament. Why does everything have to be aimed at the World Championships? Why can't we do BP in a way that addresses the kind of concerns we might have locally and not try to make it like everything is a miniature World Championship? Why do we do that? Well, I think part of it is that Worlds overdetermines what we think debate ought to look like. And we're losing a lot of different wonderful ways that we can provide sort of more organic models of debate or community-oriented models of debate. For example, I think the inclusion of expert information and the inclusion of information one looks up online and the inclusion of experts themselves, either from the private sector, the public sector, or from the university, would make debate much more valuable than having infinite practice rounds in the World Universities Championship style where no one knows anything about the topic. And then we just kind of evaluate each other about, like, how well did you say debatey phrases that you've heard in other final rounds? Well enough to where you convinced me that you could probably get a 1. I don't think that's good enough. And I certainly don't think that the World's University Council, which is composed of very nice people, by the way, they're lovely people, they're wonderful, but they're not faculty, they're not scholars, they're not university, a lot of them are volunteers. So what are they preserving versus what could be preserved? It's a necessary counterweight to a hyper-competitive model of debating that's more exclusionary than inclusionary, and also sort of keeps the dream alive of being able to do something pure or good or wholesome. The next one is we have to come in. Yes?
Before you move to the next slide, what do you think about this perspective that some people have, like a fantastic perspective that says that some of the people that promote parliamentary debate does that or do that because it kind of catch the attention of people, and afterwards people is going to in some way fall in love with the debate and incorporate the debate practices because the competition part of it is very appealing. So it's like the excuse. You think that's true? That happens, or it's just a complete waste?
I mean, I think it happens. I would say this. I would say that maybe we could broaden it and say WUDC overdetermines what we feel like competition should look like. You could have competitive debates that don't follow. So like the history of debating in the United States, which I'm most familiar with, you had debates that happened once a month, twice a month between two schools. So like people from CEU would go over to the other university that we're at, and they'd have a night of debating where the public would come, and the public would vote on who won, and that would be how it was decided. You wouldn't have breaking judges or anything like this. You wouldn't have a CA or anything like this. But the public would decide, and then the ballots they would use to determine it were ballots that were invented by an American scholar named Woodward. I can't remember his first name. I want to say Bob Woodward, but that's the journalist who, like, half of the team that brought down Nixon, right? But this guy Woodward, I do think his name was Howard. It was Howard Woodward. In 1919, he wrote this paper about how it's really false to have debates where people say, this team won and this team didn't. Nobody thinks like that. People move. So he created a kind of evaluative tool for audiences called the shift of opinion ballot. And if you Google that, you'll get a ton of examples that will come up. And the shift of opinion ballot is like a line that the audience marks at the beginning of the debate where they sit. Are they leaning more that way or that way on the motion? And then after the debate, they circle another one. And then if you calculate the distance, you can see how much the crowd has moved. And so it's kind of nowadays I cheat and I do this with the software Poll Everywhere. So when we do a public debate, we use Poll Everywhere, and people can just use their phones or their computer or tablet into anything. But as far as the competition aspect, I think it's great and it should be in there. But I just don't think it should be over-determined in this particular way. I don't think we should have only non-competitive debates. I certainly don't think that. But I do think it gets over-determined about what a competition ought to look like from that. Does that address your question, kind of?
Oh, kind of, but I just want to add, like, you assume that there is an ethical obligation of the debaters in your presentation, and I want to ask you why.
Because I think the work that we're doing here is pretty incredible, and I think debate people are really incredibly good speakers, and they are motivated and eager to talk about all kinds of issues that most people would avoid. And I also think that societies are structured clubs where people regularly meet to talk about controversial issues. And I feel that when the politics is going off the rails in your country, and people need an outlet to kind of talk about these issues, I think debate societies have an obligation to step up and offer these tools to other people. Even if it harms your ability to be internationally competitive. That's what I would say. So you've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Assuming that our goal or our duty would be to, change the public perception about debating, and I agree that VP, especially the VP format, is kind of idealistic. Like that's how debate should look like. That's why, content should be the only thing that we judge when we determine what's true, so to speak, right? What we lean towards. But don't you think, aiming for an idealistic thing, even if I guess we know that we're not going to reach it. We're not going to reach the purity of fire, right? Or of extinguishing it. But aiming for it and hitting the goal, not quite but close, will achieve more than aiming for less, and then probably not even achieve that. But on an absolute scale, that we achieve less if we aim for less, and that we achieve more if we aim for the ideal.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I agree with that. But what I would say to that is who's determining how close we're coming? And I think that devil's in that detail. So if you're only having debates for other circuit debaters, you can say, wow, look how brilliant these arguments are. But if you sit, I wrote this piece several years ago, the airplane test, right? If you're flying home from an IB and you've won the IB, would you be able to describe in an interesting way to the person sitting next to you your arguments?
This is what I actually wanted to add to what. Of course, that this might have realistic, utopic part of it. But if you look at the formative part of the debate, still it has validity in practice. Exactly what you said. How you would debate with your neighbor, how you would have the speech elevator, which, by the way, in the British parliamentarian debate, you have timing, how to organize your argument. You meet the rector in the elevator and you have 30 seconds to...
The elevator speech,
Yeah, the elevator speech. So it might be a form of exercising and framing your messages, timing, focus, key points and things that you get through exercising different kinds of debate.
Yeah, and I think this is an important point, and I'll get to answering you later, because I don't disagree with you, but I just think that the point is, who's making the evaluation is important. So, and I also am not exclusive kind of thinker. I think we can have all of it.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's some kind of mutual exclusivity here between people who want a pure, and I actually am somebody who advocates that WEDC should be even more strict. If we really want to have the World Championship, why is it open registration? Why don't you have to prove that you can win tournaments to go? Right? If we really want to have the World Champion, run the logic to its extreme, it's like sort of informal logic, you run it to its extreme conclusion. Why can anybody go? If we're really looking for the World Champion, why do we break 32 teams? I mean, there's lots of things that it does where it's not sure what kind of format it wants to be. And there's lots of debates on council where they just don't even see how these things sort of contradict that. So I feel like the world is kind of like this. But this is important. Lots of people do debate for lots of reasons. Just like lots of people would do martial arts for lots of reasons. self-defense, or I really want to get the roundhouse kicked down the way Bruce Lee did or whoever. I want to be perfect like that, a kind of perfection.
But all
which
of
would be
them
the
has
purity.
discipline. So
Yeah.
this is so
Self-discipline of the
again.
mind, but also
Mind,
exercise.
body.
Maybe you feel like you're out of shape. So debate should be like this. There should be many different reasons to do it. So as far as the ideal goes, we can get closer to the ideal. But as we move in that direction, we want to make sure that we're sort of communicating the insights we're making to people who could use this kind of tools and this kind of practice for their daily life. So for example, something that is like chess, or like debate is chess, and it's built up a lot better than debate, where you have sort of obligations for chess masters to go and to play a simul, or to go and do some kind of a blindfolded game, to demonstrate how good you can get, which gets people interested in sort of studying the game on their own. And debate is, of course, much more than a game. I don't feel like the game metaphor really works very well for it. I like this fire metaphor a lot better for it, but this is new. This is like all sort of new material. But as far as the ideal goes, it's almost like when you look at political speech through Habermas. Yes? So Habermas has the ideal speech situation. And people have critiqued him for that, saying, well, we'll never have that. But I don't think these people read him carefully. He's saying that we need some kind of a metric to determine how free or how good or how open our persuasive moments are with one another in a democracy. You have to have that. So for debate to have a certain ideal, that ideal should be grounded in what do we want debate to look like in its ideal form. That's great. Now let's see if we can do that in front of, and maybe there can be some spark that's generated if we bring in other people. And this kind of focus here, just on the World Championship, which is the ideal of the ideal. Who's the champion of ideal debate? That's kind of what WDC wants to determine, right? Who's the best speaker in the world that year? I mean, it's very Greek, right? It's like, who's the best speaker in the world that year? Right? It's like excellence is not an act, but a habit. Like, you're not excellent forever if you won the WDC. It's like the Olympics. You're not excellent forever. You're excellent in that moment. Can you do it again? Right? That's the Athenian sort of sense about it. The ancient Athenian sense about it, right? Ancient Greek theory says, but can you do it again? Right? That's why the reward wasn't like a big marble statue, but a wreath of leaves. Leaves decay. Right? Your championship temporary. Habitus, right? Like, you always have to be practicing, and you always have to be good, because someone else will be better than you the next day. Just because you've won something doesn't mean you're good. Right? So the meter is an ideal. We can do a lot with that. All these wonderful bridges. Like, if we didn't have a concept of abstract ideal measurement, we couldn't have them. And Budapest would be less beautiful and we'd be more wet. So, moving on. I didn't think this would be the most controversial point. I thought this might be. Become antagonistic towards facts. Okay, so, yes?
Sorry, I still had a question on the previous slide.
Oh, okay, wow. I can't believe you. So this means you guys are much more accepting of this than. Okay, that's fine.
I think what you said, like, that you feel that debating societies have a moral duty to do this.
Ethical.
Duty to do this. Even if it hurts your international competitiveness. I just find that kind of like interesting, or I'd be interested in hearing more about that from the perspective of, I think that's very intuitive as like a duty when you think of societies that, or circuits that are already internationally competent. But for example, like, myself, I often I really like kind of the idea of conveying like debate skills to people who you don't necessarily assume will be like on your World Euros teams, etc. And kind of like doing debating as something that benefits people and helps like people grow and helps them get tools for things that they think are important outside of like a debate room. But I also find that often it's very hard to justify spending your resources on that in like developing circuits where you like don't have people grading at competitions, where you struggle to like get debates together and so on. So how do you think do you think that is differential in developing circuits and otherwise? And or do you think there are ways of doing that are kind of in those circumstances easier to do without undermining kind of circuit development?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that the model of circuit development that is implicitly being proposed by you assumes that the people from the public have nothing to contribute and they will just be labor that you'll have to expend without developing your Euros and your World's team. I would say this is not true. I would say that when you bring people in to talk about debates, they might have all kinds of amazing weird life experiences or some weird book they read that will help you develop your ability to argue. So it's sort of like this odd thing, and I don't think you're alone in this odd thing of like, I've known debate people for a long time, I've worked in debate for a long time, and there are people who are just like these unabashed, radical democracy supporters until you suggest that regular people should judge the debates. Right? And then they're like, oh no, we can't have that, we can't have that, we can't have that, we can't have that. And so it's always struck me as a very funny, I remember when I was doing American policy debate, which if you think BP has problems, boy howdy, you should look at American policy debate if you want to see some problems. American policy debate is done in 2 places in the world, the United States and Japan. It's our little gift we left them after occupation. 2 things, we're like, here's how to play baseball and here's how to debate. Oh, and here's the Constitution, don't change it ever, okay, bye. We'll be right over here if you need us. Yeah, oh, and you can't ever declare war on anyone again, that's a little gift to you as well. It's what happens when you assign the military to write a Constitution for people. Anyway, this is another lecture. So, the question for policy debate now in America, as far as this kind of trouble goes, like when I used to judge it, we'd be in some building and there's lots of timeouts. It's kind of a dream. Imagine a BP if you could just take a timeout. And you had a certain amount of clock time and you could go confer with your partner and work on your argument or something. You do that in American policy debate. You have 10 minutes per debate. Use discretionary language. I would go out in the hallway as a judge and stuff, and oftentimes I might find a custodian or someone. I'm like, why don't you come and help me judge this debate? Boy, people would be like, people would think this was horrible. But this person would often have very good things to say. Not only were people surprised that they could understand and follow the debate, which says a lot about our judging of class and your occupation and your ontology, like a character of your soul based on your job. But not only that, they were very interesting. They also gave good pointers to people that people hadn't thought of. And we're like, why don't we think about those things in debate? So the second thing is cost, and I do think this is a real issue, and I don't want to trivialize this issue at all, is that debate and international debate is incredibly expensive, and I think it's a terrible shame that European universities don't offer a lot of financial support to debate programs. And I don't really know how I can help do this. There's a lot of good reasons for any country to support, or any university to support this debate program, but I don't know how to make that argument. I'm just not familiar enough with European university funding questions. If I immerse myself in that debate, I'll have very little time for the trivial, nitpicky fights I have with my other faculty about funding at my school. And that's fun. So I'm like doing that. But in the United States, it might seem like we have more money because we're tuition driven. But since we're tuition driven, if we fail and there's really no one, we're not too big to fail, in the words of former President Obama, we're not too big to fail. They'll let us fail if we don't make our budget. And universities close all the time, with scary kind of frequency. Some are state supported, some are not. But we don't have deep pockets either. But there's this sort of American ideology that a debate team is a necessary thing to have on the campus, and the faculty members should direct it. And they should do these regular events, and that's kind of driven into the ideology, and I don't know where that comes from. But the financial picture, I don't know if this hurts you in the financial, especially if you're a young fledgling society. I don't know if it hurts you to kind of just say anyone's welcome to our practices. Anyone's sort of welcome to comment. I don't know if it costs you anything. Taking them to a competition, that's a different matter. They might not qualify, right? So.
Just to be clear, like the cost doesn't mean like monetary costs, but rather like, you usually have very few people organizing the events as well. Like that kind of like, if you can only have like so many events.
Yeah, we don't have capacity.
The capacity to have people come to your practices?
Organizing events outside of practices is
Oh, well, then just
Yeah.
close the gap. You're not having a separate event. Just bring them to your practice. Let them come to the practice. They don't have to speak. They can just.
Yeah, but all our practices are constantly open. Like we are trying to recruit literally all of the time. Like we've had something like 5 new people coming in Hungary. Like we've touched it all the time, and we're barely surviving all the time as well. Yeah. But something that I would have liked to comment on earlier on, but maybe still, is that you mentioned this idea of bringing in lay people to judge debates. Like I do find that an interesting idea, but this is where I have to say that I know the BP debate is in a lot of ways just completely not ideal, the way that we do it, but I also think that it does have a lot of things to teach people. And one of the things I've observed is that whenever we've done a debate and then had the audience judge, they always thought that the last opposition was the best. Always. Because that bias is just so strong that the last thing you hear is the most persuasive thing to you, and you don't know the rest. So I think that in that sense, there is a point to bringing in people, but often it's just sort of a point to show people.
Yeah. I mean, I think, No, I agree with you, but I think this is evidence I think this is support for what I'm trying to say, which is that this is exactly why we have this ethical obligation, is because of this incapability. But that's not an incapability of understanding and judging arguments, it's an incapability with the arbitrary and ridiculous format of BP. 4 teams in a room is there because you can't reserve too many rooms. That's the only reason it's there, is so that you can have it in one building. There's no argumentation theory or philosophy that says 4 teams and across the long diagonal line. All this is generated as defensive rhetoric for something that was a pragmatic choice. Most people, when they look at a political issue, they see it as a spectrum, and they align themselves somewhere on it. They listen to arguments and they move one direction or another. So the Woodward ballot is what you should be using when you have a public debate, and you should not be using strict BP. That's why maybe this is controversial. I'm kind of in my own little professor world, so I don't think this is controversial at all. But this is what I mean by chosen by, it's like, oh, they always think closing opposition won. Great, they're not going to break at Worlds, but how are they going to do in elections? That's the question I'm interested in. Yeah, they're not going to do, let's not bring them to Worlds with us. They're not going to break. They won't do our society any good. But how are they going to do when they vote in their election? Or how are they going to do when they vote in the referendum? Are they going to vote for closing up? Are they going to vote for the last argument they heard? Well, probably not. It depends on what you think, how people make these decisions on arguments. And I think people are very capable of being persuaded all the time. Just walk down the street here in Budapest, you're assaulted by persuasive messages. Eat here, do this, smoke this, eat this, ingest this, come in here. Go into this place, buy this paprika, right? I mean, maybe I'm a tourist, so I see this all the time. Bags of paprika that I'm supposed to load my suitcase with up and fly across the ocean. All of this kind of stuff is very normal for people. And I think the particularities of the kind of format we do, because it saves room space, or it allows more teams to compete and we have a better social or more fun, or whatever the reason might be, kind of fall away when you start to do it like that. So if you do, maybe the capacity question is, well, then we do have to do a separate event, we can't do it. But I think those separate events help you become a better arguer. And then you have to ask the question of, do I want to become a better arguer at Worlds? Yes. Okay, how much of that trades off from me becoming a better arguer in my field, or in my community, or in the world, or in my life? And all these things do kind of trade off with a little bit opportunity cost, but not as much as you would think. And I think a good argument is a good argument. And I think we lose track of that when we start to pigeonhole it in the terms of what the obligations of a whip speaker might be. And then we start to conflate that with good argument in a way that might be unhealthy. Let's do it. Okay, done agonistic towards facts. So this is something that the Debate Society can do without a special event, just in sort of your daily lives or in your classes and things like that, is instead of sort of doubling down on the facts like the Park Service has done by tweeting out the amount of carbon in the atmosphere every day. I don't think this is going to persuade anyone who's a climate denier. They're just going to find alternate causality for this. You want to, instead of doubling down on the fact, double down on why the fact is holy, or why the fact is the right one to believe, or why that set of information would be preferred in this context. That's why I use the term agnostic, because I think a lot of times with facts, especially in the scientific literature base out there, that science is answering all questions and science is going to be great, totally ignoring Thomas Kuhn's book of 30 years ago or so, which kind of debunks that model of science. Science is still good, but it doesn't work the way that we think it does. We believe facts are special. There's something out there that's higher than us, a higher power than us, but what is it? Is it going to be this particular way? I think a lot of people are double down on their denomination rather than on their fact. Like, what am I, a Catholic, or am I, am I Baptist, am I Methodist, this kind of thing. So I think in daily life you can highlight the power of debate by saying, well, why would we want to prefer this set of information in this case than that one? Why might that be? And a lot of different things. Since you're debaters, you'll be able to generate lots of different reasons that can then, you can engage with other people in a pretty productive way instead of, well, these are the facts. And they say, you're fake news, or whatever, right? Yeah.
What exactly do you mean when you say facts? Because, I mean, you can define facts in different ways. Do you think it's the objective truth, right? Or you can say, well, I believe something is factual, or I say that's a fact when I believe that it is factual, it reached 100%, right?
Or you can say, I found 5 or 6 external experts who agree with me. So now it's a fact.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of different ways. I mean, you're doing what I'm suggesting right now. That's what I'm suggesting. And I think a lot of people, when they get into sort of political debate or debates about things with their friends or maybe in a class or on the street, we forget to do this. And then we sort of make judgments or we're sort of dismissive by saying facts are sort of reach the level of objective truth. And I just think that's not constructive for trying to, if the point of democracy is to move people to your side and try to get them to come to your position, it's not constructive to sort of punish them for not seeing the world in a particular way. And I think that's how that rhetoric is playing out right now. And this is fascinating for me as a rhetorician because seeing that kind of punitive discourse coming out and lots of rhetoricians doubling down on scientific truth and fact ignore the tradition of rhetoric, the sophistic tradition, which Plato fought against his whole life, which is this incredibly sort of well-founded idea that people are the measure of what's good and bad. And, you have all these sophists saying things to Socrates like, military dictatorship certainly would stink to live under, but the Spartans seem to like it. Or it's terrible to have a king, but the, King Philip over there, the Macedonians seem to like it. And, some people don't think democracy is worth anything, but the Athenians seem to like it. So, and that's the Pythagorean stuff. But anyway, so I guess this is the question I think we should ask a little bit more. What do we mean by facts? And what's a good understanding of a fact in the terms of the debate, in the terms of the issue that we're trying to persuade our friends to come on board with? And this is often avoided because facts are a nice shortcut. Because it gets laborious and tiresome and hard to go through all that. But I feel like with the election of Donald Trump, this is open again in a way to where you have a bunch of people who necessarily have to perform a kind of democratic facade to stay where they are, right? And there are certain people who are looking, maybe Donald Trump is not looking to the far future, but certain members of his party are looking to the far future, and certain members of the cabinet are looking to the far future. And so there has to be some consideration of how do we get people to move away from supporting this kind of thing, and they're trying to bring people into supporting them. So how can we do that? We can interrogate the hard truth about facts and maybe make it a little bit more agnostic. Like, there has to be something out there that's more than just our opinions. There has to be something out there that we can intersubjectively verify, which is a scientific way of thinking about what truth is. Is it like, so in the sciences, what counts as truth is intersubjective verification, which is I can do the experiment here in Budapest, and you can do it in Madrid, or you can do it in Beijing, and we get the same result.
But that is called validity. But
Yeah.
I wanted to add a little bit on this, because at the end it's very important to distinguish between science, facts, and the argument, I think, should be all the time towards humanity, because, for instance, Nazi, they used the science to do such a damage for humanity, and they use science from medicine, from genetics. They use atomic physics or nuclear physics, and so on and so forth. And with scientific argument, they did such a mess to this world. Second, to come our days, Mr. Trump sell out to the American population his voting, sorry to say so. So how much is emotion, how much is science, how much is fact? This is one thing. But I think what here it was argued in this lecture, and I like it very much, that the part of moral, the part of the way how you look at the debate and how productive it is, it's more important what it's serving the debate rather than process itself and bringing just facts and science. So it depends at the end what's the purpose of it rather than tools that you use for winning a debate or for winning the massive or critical mass of the people on your side. So I think aside of the facts and that, it has an emotional part
Yeah.
that should be balanced there, because they will tell you it's a fact. There is a fire, let's use, it's a fire in a forest and it's next to you. You have to fight it against it. Or you say, okay, terrorist attacks, all this. So there are the emotional part of it that sometimes counterbalance the scientific arguments, facts, and so on and so forth. So it has multi-faces, this part of debating, and especially when it's about politics and when it's about...
And I think it's kind of neat to think of the debate society at the university as the place that's kind of like holding this down.
Yeah.
Whereas other fields would say, oh, that's just nonsense. Let's get to the truth of the field. Let's get to the truth of the field. And the question is always begged, well, who determines the truth of the field? Why do we arrive at this truth of the field? Like, how often do professors in the field teach the controversies that have arrived them to the theories that everyone accepts in the field today? It happens, but it's very rare. When it does happen, everybody's sort of like, oh wow, that's very interesting to go back to that. But for students, maybe not, but you guys can be the ones to say, well, we're sort of keeping this fire alive, or we're sort of keeping this idea burning, just to use my original metaphor there. So this isn't to say that facts are irrelevant or facts are, like we live in sort of as the lecture tomorrow is going to talk about, a post-fact world. Post-fact world, which is what the media is calling about it, but I don't want to steal any thunder from Aaron. He's going to do a great lecture. But when I hear post-fact, I hear post-journalistic fact, because the only people using this kind of phrase are the journalists, who have a very, very, very peculiar notion of what a fact is, versus a scientist, versus another kind of scholar, like a historian. What's a fact for a historian versus an archaeologist? This is something really, I think, worth investigating that can improve your debating in a really kind of cool way. So, Amelia, you want to say something?
I just think this question came up a lot in the memory round, which I actually judged was on. And it was like your team.
I hope you gave him a good rank. Oh, okay, well then, yeah, he's like, oh, go ahead, then please, tell me.
I actually think the fact that you did win improves the control of debate ideology, because my critique of it in it was that it was like, oh, this argument of like, if we just know more things, this will lead to a better world, right? But it's what you're saying, right? That it's what is the end goal of these facts being utilized towards, right? It's not if we all have evidence of oppression in the world, right? We have enough facts of it. It's not that we need more facts of it, it's that we don't care in society, right? And that's the problem. How is it we can alter our vision towards that to create like a better world? It's kind of back to the question.
Yeah, like we see this example a lot as amassing more facts about the terrors and harm of human trafficking or oppression and labor. It doesn't really alter the political climate about these things, and so debate can be a kind of a place where we can generate maybe that connection if we treat debate more seriously, which is I think what I'm suggesting. Right? The idea of like amassing information, it doesn't seem to be enough. And this also shows us the value of debate is information is not necessarily persuasion. Like I can give you a stack of facts and you can say, that's garbage. Or that was produced in a country that doesn't have good scientists, or whatever. I mean, there's thousands of reasons you can say, you know, that's not good, and many of them are economic, personal, and kinds of things as well. So this is an important point, I think, to think about.
I think it's important, especially when we try to appeal to the public, or we try to, welcome people into what debating is, to, like, not necessarily, like, as you said, if I have, what's it called, getting shot for, like,
Oh, vaccination.
Vaccination equals autism, right?
Right.
Like there was this comic, 100 studies say, no, it's not true. One study say, yes, it's true. Oh, yeah, I knew it, see?
But a very attractive celebrity says.
Yes.
Yeah, so people believe what they want to believe, kind of like they lean towards the facts that confirms their opinion in the first place, right?
But that one, it's another. Let's put it in a different way. I think you still want it with science and science. Science and science. I give you the debate bombing that it's resulting in refugees. So we have answers and debates of refugees, but we don't have a stake on saying something when they are bombed, their home. So how you put these two things? So when it's something emotional, presumably they are coming next to us with a terrorist attack. Presumably, take the Köln event in Germany, when they say presumably they came and they will rape our wives and our girlfriends. Presumably coming with certain risk that it's spatially and emotionally closer to our thing, we have a debate and we have a reaction on it. But we don't look at the causal thing, and it's bombing. Some people are killing there, some people bombing is creating a lot of disaster. That it's and we look at the effects and we debate around, but we don't look at the causes. So this kind of a debate. So what is good for humanity? And this is humanitarian part, which is protected by the, if we go to the morale, to the ethic, to the so on and so forth. So we have, and ever in the history, the refugees, they were protected by law and by humanity, and also to stop the war and to make peace and everybody to be. So you see how these two things are disregarded. And this is a matter of debate, not vaccination and the other statistic, which, by the way, there are contra forces that are keeping the market. I think that pharma never will say yes, vaccination is causing autism, and by the way, my son is living with autism. They will say yes, will cause and to lose billions and billions of euros. So
it's just, I wanted to use that as an example, basically, where when we decide to be agnostic towards facts, like towards, there is evidence that some things are probably more true than others.
Absolutely.
That's why we come to believe as a rational member of society towards certain things. But when we become agnostic towards facts, then that could bear a risk of letting these things go out of control in a 1983 George Orwell kind of way, so that someone determines what is true by just extinguishing the other alternatives.
no,
Sure.
this is Thomas Kuhn. If you want to read a good book to understand how relativity is the truth and the facts and the science, read Thomas Kuhn, The Shifting Paradigm, and then you'll understand. And then you'll understand that some things that are scientific, at a certain point it become redundant. And then that's why we have to look back. And this is actually how the science it should progress and go further. So a truth it might be relatively for a period of time, but with the advancement of technology and science, we should to revisit and to follow the truth till the end. Yeah, this is the academic agility. Yeah, to go back to look further and further, not to remain embedded in some truths and lemmas and theoremas. Sorry.
Yeah, and there's two things I want to speak to what you just said, because I think that is the proper attitude of the agnostic, isn't it? To say, I'm willing to believe. I believe that there's something out there that's true, and there's evidence that leans towards truth. And the atheist would say, no, it's all like this incredibly radical solipsistic, post-solipsism kind of ridiculous post-postmodernist view where it's like, there's no such thing as a fact. Everything we know is completely constructed. The universe is a hologram, etc., etc., etc. Right? So all of that kind of rhetoric is not what I'm suggesting at all. But I am suggesting exactly the point which you made clear in the position when you say, I'm willing to entertain. I look at this issue and I see that there's information that's saying this is true. More information than false. I think that's the healthy attitude that debate societies can infect their whole campus with. You brought up vaccinations, so I can talk about viruses now and disease. You can infect the whole campus with this kind of attitude. And this is also kind of connected to a sort of healthy skepticism. Like, I'm not going to accept something because you tell me it's a fact. I want to know how that fact was constituted. And this is where Kuhn becomes incredibly valuable. Because Kuhn gave us a lot in the structure of scientific revolutions. But all I'll say about it tonight is that nothing is immune from the ideology of its own value. Even science. Even science is ideologically driven. And I think that's what Kuhn really was trying to show us, that the normal functioning of science is political and ideological. It doesn't mean that the findings of science are not good, or that we should abandon science, but that we have to understand that so we can understand the value of science. That's why Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson are so dangerous, because they say only scientific, they want to, and in some ways Sam Harris as well, they want to replace, like when they say political science, they say political science. But someone like me, who's sort of a rhetorician and humanist, would say political science. So we're at odds. And the reason we're at odds is because I just simply don't believe in purity. And the idea of purifying all human reason down to one method is horrific to me, for the very reason that I just don't believe, and I don't think there's a good case to say that there are things that escape ideological drive, and science is normative as well, of like the things that it chooses to investigate are driven by this. Just like the question about how much public debate do we have over bombing our enemies versus how much public debate do we have over how to deal with the refugees that result from our bombing. Like, or how do we deal with the fallout from the things we do? Like the United States never has really, I don't think, adequately dealt with. Maybe Obama's starting to get there with what we did to Japan at the end of World War II. You know, we were like, we need to stop them, but we didn't really consider. So this is the kind of like, what gets chosen to be on the questioning, what gets chosen to be on the chopping block, what doesn't. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, but what do you suggest, like, how do you suggest you can be agnostic towards facts? Do you suggest that you should not just oppose one fact towards the other, but more like use reasoning and analysis?
Yeah, so instead of saying, you know, global warming is real, you say, let's look at the data sets.
Yeah.
Or let's look at the people who are coming up with this. Let's look at who they are and where they're from and things like that. And it's also great to educate yourself, because a lot of this data is available. Like in my country, they're talking about ending the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Trump is going to cut the budget for this. That's all of our public arts funding for the most part, except for small communities. That's our public TV and radio. All of it will be gone. So I was like, how much money do they get from the federal government? So I looked it up and looked at all this, and I'm like, this looks like a lot of money. But if you look at it in the context of the information of the other kinds of money we're spending, it's not that much. So this kind of helps me. So agnostic doesn't mean, I don't want to say hardcore skepticism. It doesn't mean doubt and oppose. It means be willing to believe. So instead of saying, well, these are the facts, and I say, if you don't accept the facts, there's something wrong with you, or you're stupid, or ha ha ha, I'm a debater, too bad for you, right? Which are some of the primary attitudes. The attitude might be, well, I'm willing to believe. Show me where your facts come from. Don't show me facts, show me how your facts come from. Let's have that conversation. And I think debate provides a unique, very unique place to, we're doing this all the time. Like, we'll go, if you adjudicate, you'll go and vote on one set of facts one round, you'll get that same set of facts at 4 the next round. How is this possible? And we take it for granted, but out there, that's a little, they'd be like, how can you do that? Don't you just have, like when I talk about my job of teaching debate, they're like, oh, you just send them and they get the facts, right? And then they're fine, right? And I'm like, no. As Jacques Derrida said, and I can't say it in French, so I'll say it in a terrible English translation. Lies are not self-effacing in the light of the truth. It probably sounds better in French, doesn't it? Yeah,
Everything sounds good in French.
yeah, can you say that? Everything sounds better. I need a cigarette when I lecture. Real French Academy. Okay. Debate is not servile as epistemic. What do I mean by this? Debate is not the place where we access information created elsewhere. It is an engine for the creation of knowledge. It is an engine for the creation of knowledge. It isn't the place where we get the economics right or wrong. It's the place where we generate new economic ideas. It's not the place where we get the historiography right or wrong. It's the place where we generate new ways of thinking about history. We should consider ourselves scholars. We should consider ourselves creators of information and knowledge. We should consider ourselves this way. We shouldn't consider debate as just some kind of a magic key to the door of information generated by other fields. We should consider ourselves providing a unique way of knowing the world and knowing different fields. It is very, very rare for faculty from other things, sociology, anthropology, chemistry, to accept debate as anything other than a diversion from the real work. Debates get in the way, things like that. I go to my faculty, I say, I want to challenge you to incorporate a debate into your course. They say, well, how can I do that? I don't have any time. We have to learn real things. Right? They immediately make the judgment on it. I say, what is the difference between a debate and doing an essay? What is the difference between a debate and doing some kind of reaction reading or a class discussion. Why not do it like that? So this is a unique thing that debate can do, is kind of push and make that larger challenge to the university of, we are like a department ourselves too. We are knowledge creators. And then demonstrating you can do that by having experts look at your debate and say, I didn't think about that. This happens all the time. So we're about to have a debate on my campus back when I get home about the International Criminal Court, and American involvement in it, which is 0, and whether we should change that. And so there will be legal experts watching this, and I fully expect them to say, I didn't think about it that way. Because having different people look at an issue changes it. You know, as they say, I think it was D.T. Suzuki said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, in the experts, there are few. Right? And this is also Kuhn. Yeah? This is why all scientific revolutions in the history of science were brought by people who were mostly under 30, for the most part. It wasn't your 70-year-old master of science saying, we've been doing it wrong, and my scientific work is... But that's the person who's defending the normative ideology, because it's gotten him or her to where they are. It's the new scientist who comes along and makes the revolutionary discovery by being like, why does everybody think like this? Like, they're new to the party, and they're like, why does everybody think like this? And then they do an experiment, and it invalidates everything, and then the old scientists fight the new scientists, but not the way you would think. So, that's good as well. Okay, so I know I'm consuming a lot of time here. I think this might be the last one. Debate is not for something, but we have to end.
No, it's not about ending, it's about the last slide.
Oh.
Because, yeah, it catch my attention. Obviously, and I want you to address what is the relationship between this circuit debate and this epistemic revolution or generation of knowledge. Like, is there any, or are we just repliers of the current status quo?
There's plenty. Yeah, in circuit debating, there's plenty of this. Like, I can't think of a competition I've been to where I didn't go home and think, man, I really need to read more about this, or that was a really interesting idea. Where did it come from? It's not like we bring a bunch of books or articles or research papers and share them with each other and say, oh, I got it from this citation or whatever. Like, where did it come from? It comes out of the pressure in the moment, and you have to say something. You can't stay quiet. And it also comes from, like, this is why debate has a lot in common with language learning, because you have to stand up and make a fool of yourself. You don't even know what you're saying. And it makes you sort of a master of the foreign language of debating, right? This is why it's great for that. But it's also great for, like, the language of argumentation, the language of being persuasive. So you'll get there, like, I have no idea what I said, but we got a 2, that's great. Like, I just talked because the pressure was on. I can't stay quiet. Right? And the ability and the challenge of debate is that we're all open to making mistakes, big mistakes. And every time we speak, we're inviting mistakes. And in most of our aspects of our life, we don't invite mistakes, and we don't want mistakes to happen.
But if you consider what you just mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, that was very interesting. Like, at the beginning of each open or each competition of the circuit, we have a big series of restrictions of how the debate must go on. We are in some way limiting this epistemic freedom and the way to interpret some of the things in a crazy way and debate about these crazy ideas and maybe generating crazy epistemic new knowledge.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you go to the other slide, when we say be agnostic to the facts, so this is just a general consequence, because it's implying triangulation of your facts, it's implying digging out or creating, emerging from different idea to a final argument. So I think being agnostic, it's pushing you to the facts and to the emotion, it's pushing you to create new epistemic, to do analysis, meta-analysis, all kind of a thing that will push and actually will boost the epistemic part of the debate.
But I meant
So being ruled is not bad, to
Well,
myself.
I think it's a good point. I totally agree with you in your critique. But I would say that what this is the battle in competitive debate between fairness and epistemology. So right now, the vanguard of the international debate scene thinks that fairness produces good debates. So we work overtime to make sure the competition is fair, and the rhetoric of fairness governs how arguments are created and what arguments are preferred. So we have hours for equity, hours for what these different motions say, tons and tons of time for this, to present a scene of totally unquestioned fairness, so that the good arguments can come from fairness. If we were to critique that and say, no, good arguments don't come from fairness, they come from some other principle, controversy or circulation, if you take a media perspective. What circulates is where we should generate motions and arguments from. So what circulates in the popular sphere, or in the international media, or in a particular sense of scholarship. If we elevated those principles of fairness, yeah, I think we might solve this problem. But I think until we get over our attachment to a competition must first and foremost be fair, then we're going to be stuck here. Because all of that discourse is generated by the idea that fairness is the highest principle. And I think pretty uncritically in international debating is what we think. We think, I've worked in enough tab rooms to see how CA teams do it. They're like, is this motion balanced? And they go and write down, they make the little board and they say, opening government can say these two things, they can say these two things. Okay, everyone has enough to say, it's good. That's the way it's evaluated. A lot of times. Say, can everyone say something that could possibly win? Yes. Okay, good, we've done our duty. And that's the principle of fairness. What are the principles to say, I don't know it's fair, but it's circulating. It's in the international media. It's circulating. It appears in pop culture. It's circulating as a debate among among NGOs about how to do development or something. If that was the principle, then we would have different kinds of competitions. It's going to happen. But yeah, I do think you're right. I think the epistemic value of debate is limited by the fairness doctrine, which is perpetuated by the fair-speaking front, the vanguard political party who wins the tournaments. Fair-speaking front. The FSF.
And the fact that, I am sorry for speaking again, but the fact that you are evaluating the fairness of a motion regarding the position of the debater, but not the paradigm of the judge that is going to judge the competition and probably not going to have a lot or to put a lot of value to certain arguments that you say in certain competition, and that's something pretty much unspoken, because when you are supposed to have a World University Debating Championship, you make a lot of wrong assumptions, because what is the world standard? What are we supposed to understand as valid? What are the plausibility of the premises that you put into certain debate competition, and how is that you pretend that a debater will achieve this, and what if a debater says this and the judge doesn't find it reasonable at all? Even if it's completely reasonable, but it doesn't belong to its paradigm. Like, they never evaluate how frustrating it is for debaters of the global south to come to these competitions and to throw arguments that doesn't fit into your square mind of, first world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a luckily the political platform of the Fair Speaking Front was published before Malaysia Worlds. It's called the Speaking and Debating Guide. It was published by the Malaysia CA team, and in that you can see that the reason this happens is because all arguments are constructed in a way of what's fair for competition. That's the bottom line. Not from where someone... In fact, it explicitly says in this document that where a debater comes from should have no bearing on how they're judged. Which is an incredibly radical political position to take when you're dealing with political argument. Right? So no one can say things like... it all has to be done in sort of this fair way. And there's more and more pages spent on what a countermodel is than on how do we evaluate how do different kinds of political systems work, and what's a normalized argument in China versus Venezuela, or what have you. Which would take a lot more work to do. It's much easier to just say, well, let's make it fair, let's make it antiseptic, let's pour bleach on human speech, kill everything, and now we can have our perfect argumentative competition. It becomes much more messy when you move away from fairness as your top principle. Much more messy.
In terms of actually advancing the technique of good argumentation, I think it makes sense though, because it's very easy to say, oh, you didn't read that newspaper, obviously, therefore, you just don't understand
You're
what
uninformed.
I'm talking about. That is very easy to say, but actually dealing, and here we are about being agnostic towards facts again, disregarding that I'm probably right because I know more than the other person. I disregard it and still actively engage with the argumentation, the logic behind why the other person thinks they are right, and try to counteract that. So I got myself covered on both sides of it, basically, and I think that is good for debating in a competitive way, and it's also good for debating with a common person.
Yeah, there's a lot of begged questions in than someone else. Someone's life experiences could be
Yeah.
far more knowledgeable than what people have gotten out of a sociological study about whatever, right? So these kind of things this kind of question raises those things as well. Is like, are we interested in a model of argumentation that comes out of the Enlightenment? Or are we interested in a model of argumentation that the post-war theorists offer, like Stephen Toulmin or Chaim Perlman and Lucille Brooks-Tidica, people like that, who said, there's no problem with the advancement of the quality of argumentation. People are doing just fine with that. New crises emerge. People debate them in their country. People find ways to persuade people under difficult situations, and things tend to go badly or good or whatever, right? Or sometimes people impossibly tend to persuade people even though they're like the most horrible person alive. And then they convince everybody to. So argumentation theorists are saying, yeah, it's all happening sort of inductively. So if we go and study that and try to make a system out of that, we'll be better off. Which is one way of doing it. Then also the explosion of research in epistemology from philosophers, rhetoricians, language theorists, things like that, of what does it mean? How do I know that I know? Raises the question of knowledge in a way that might address this post-fact thing. But I just don't think that we're there in the popular press yet. I think we're still saying post-fact in terms of journalistic fact, which is a conception we're probably better off without. Like, I don't need Anderson Cooper's idea of the facts in my life. I really don't. I have much better sources for that. But this is an interesting way of sort of talking about it. But I think this problem is like, what if we said our top value is that debate is to generate knowledge? Okay, this changes the entire way debates are judged globally, which is the team that gets the one is the one that made me think about something in a new way.
But
Now, I don't have the problem of the global south in the same context, right? I'm not trying to bleach it. I can say, wow, I didn't know things were like that in Colombia. But then agnostic towards facts, you have to convince me that you know about Colombia. And you can't just say, well, I'm from there. Because then people will say, well, that's not critical. So you have to, so it all kind of comes together. But the question is, how do we influence the international debate scene to move away from the fairness front into some other kind of political organization? Because this cartel really has control of international debate. All the CAs who CA one tournament, hop to the other one, hop to the other one, hop to the other one. These are the officers of the fair speaking front.
But
they are relentless.
sometimes, just to answer to my colleague, I like him. And sometimes you shouldn't answer and to come with the facts. Sometimes you can advance and have a lot of contribution to the epistemic part of the debate by raising a good question rather than coming with a perfect answer.
Right.
So
That changes the nature of a good speech as well, and the role of POIs. But I mean, you can play with this. This also goes back to the other principle of like WEDC doesn't own us.
Yep.
Debate belongs to you. Debate belongs to the debaters. WEDC doesn't own us. They control one competition. One. Why have you been persuaded to make every other competition look like theirs? It's the persuasive power of the fair-speaking front. They're the political wing of a terrorist organization called the Tournament Cartel. Where the only good debates come out of tournaments. Right? This is my political fantasy that I'm going to write about. The fair-speaking front. I'm going to be in the jungle fighting against them. It's going to be debate is not for something, it's something. So, to be quick on this one, this is like debate as sort of like, I'm going to use debate to get a good job as an attorney. I'm going to get debate, it's going to help me in my career in politics. Instead of thinking of debate as like a way of life, or something I'm going to do. So this comes to my interest in sort of Buddhism. It's like, I'm going to meditate to be enlightened, versus I meditate. Which is the proper sort of, the Buddhist rhetoric would say, you're already a Buddha. What are you doing? Like, just sit down and breathe. Right? So just speak. You're already a debater, just speak. Just be, just do the thing. It's not for something, just do it. Debate's not, I'm working on my law career or something. I always have students come to me and I'm like, well, that's cute. That's nice. What are you right now? You have a very clear vision of what you're going to be. What are you now? Who are you now? Not a lot of rhetoric is spent on that. Lots of rhetoric is spent on the person you're going to be in 10 or 15 years, but who are you today? So this is like debate is sort of a spiritual thing, which is kind of weird. I won't get into that because I've already talked too long. And this is a whole other thing I'm writing about. So, here's a nice picture of a final round. I don't know what tournament this is from, but Yeah, but this is the forest fire IV.
Probably Tesla.
Yeah.
Or Chennai. Probably Chennai.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a Chennai debate. So anyway, thank you for your attention. These are some ideas I think, but I think when we start to look at the public in moments when the question of what's persuasive, what's a fact, what's a valid political argument come to the surface, it's a time for us to reevaluate what we do as debate societies and what is our connection to our broader society. Especially in times when your government might not be the best kind of representative government or might be a right-wing government, is the time when debate societies really do have a social obligation to take the powerful tools that we use all the time for our own amusement and start bringing them to the society. I think that is really essential, and it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit in the US, especially when all my colleagues who have the same job as me are just doubling down on scientific fact. They're like, well, these people aren't worth engaging because they just won't listen to facts. I'm like, this is, like, what do you teach, man? This is insane. Like, you know, we have a saying, put your money where your mouth is. That's what I'm sort of asking people to do, right? It's like, here's the thing that you do and you claim you teach. Now is a perfect time to reinvestigate all those principles because they're all up in the air. They're all up in the air. In the United States, they're all up in the air. I'm sure here in Europe you're watching what's going on in US politics with horror and fear about what this is going to mean. And I think the political leaders of the EU are doing the same thing. Everything is sort of up in the air. So we are the ones who have the tools for here's what you do when you're unsure. You debate it. Right? So, thank you for your attention. And happy
I think you had a question and we...
Yes.
Yeah, should I make the question?
Yes, mate.
Yeah,
Let's debate.
When I was to come to this lecture, I thought you were going to speak about something more relative to what sparked out of the Berkeley riots. And what in such a situation, what the university should do, the scholars should do, or the students should do. And at least in my society, this is something that we were kind of debated, not debated, but spoke about, and there were like controversial opinions. What do you say about it?
Oh, well, the Berkeley riots are really kind of there's a lot to say about them. There's a lot to say. So the first is, we might say that the Berkeley riots are not an exceptional event. That's what the speaker wanted to happen. That's one way to think about it. So Milo Yiannopoulos is a sort of an instigator. He's very public about it. He wants people to feel uncomfortable. He wants people to be angry. He wants people to feel threatened. All of this, he thinks that these emotions are the most productive emotions for democratic order. And this is the position that he maintains. I don't know if it's like a sincere position or not, but as a rhetorician, I'm not really interested in that question. I'm like just sort of interested in what's on the surface. So if this is his position, then this is almost like the perfect result. Because he went on the tours precisely, I think, to antagonize the universities so that he can say, look, our universities can't handle free speech. Our universities can't handle democracy.
Yes.
We're teaching young people how to be snowflakes. We're teaching young people how to be weak and how their speech is so sanitized they can't even sit and hear a dissenting opinion. So he'll say things like that. But then at his talks, he will call people out for being, and that was one of the theories about why the Berkeley riots happened, was there was suspicion that he was going to show slides of people during his presentation who worked at Berkeley or who were students at Berkeley who were undocumented and give their full names and say these people are the kind of people that Trump needs to deport. People like this person, and sort of call them out in front of the audience, right? Because he had done that at other universities with people who were transgender. So he said, here's what this person looked like 10 years ago, and had an old photo of them before they had gone through gender transformation. To push the kind of violent response and say, this is really a guy, this person, and give their name and everything like that. So he had done that at other universities. So people were like, so when he says, I'm just offering another opinion, he's sort of offering sort of this indictment kind of thing. But I don't know, I mean, it's complicated. The riot itself, I don't know what would specifically cause that, but I can understand why people might want to disrupt this kind of speech, if that's what they thought was going to happen. But one of the ways you can think about these kind of events is through a tool about, like, so how do we use these events to talk about what politics ought to look like? And there's an American theorist, his name is Kenneth Burke, and he came up with an idea of something called the pentad. And maybe I'll write on this board. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Is it, everyone has the Wi-Fi, yeah? Oh, maybe I can just flip it. Oh, wow, look at that. That's fine. They don't need this.
Yeah.
Neutrality, objectivity, fairness.
We're just deleting all of that.
Yeah. You know what? If they did, whoever produced that, I bet they can produce it again. I bet they can. I have confidence in the teachers here. They can do it. So Kenneth Burke, American.
You gotta go Kenneth so people don't think it's Edmund.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone thinks it's Edmund Burke, especially here in Europe. People do Edmund Burke. Kenneth Burke was American. He lived from early 20th century. He died in 1993, and he is one of these people who's like a tectonic thinker. He's like, I have a theory that can virtually explain all human motivation. Someone like Marx or Freud or somebody like that. I have a theory that can explain all of why humans do what they do. And his theory was dramatism, which is theater doesn't mirror life, but life mirrors the theater, and we use the theater just to investigate how we should be. So he kind of flipped that idea. All the world's a stage, this kind of thing, right?
More than Goffman?
Well, yeah, Goffman is talking about certain performances and how people do certain
Performances
kinds of
and roles.
performances. Yeah, but Kenneth Burke wasn't interested in that. He's interested in how we talk about, how you and I might talk about his motives. And if I want to change your mind about his motives and change your attitude about him, I would highlight different things about him and move them back and forth like a gestalt. So, yeah, so the pentad, it's like a gestalt, right? Think of it like that. So the pentad, his idea, is that you have these terms, and they're almost like the journalistic terms. So I actually spoke with my classes about the Berkeley riots using this to say, we would fill these in. So the act is what happened, the agent is who did it, the agency is how they did it, the scene is where it happened, and the purpose is why they did it. So none of these are the right answer, but the relationship of how I can speak about these in a persuasive speech can change people's mind about what happened. So if I say, it's all about Milo and his purpose, which is what I just did to you, right? I say his purpose is to sort of call into question the entire education system. And he was successful, because after the Berkeley riots, President Trump tweeted, if you block a speaker, no federal funding, question mark. Like, maybe this is a law he might propose to Congress, that if you don't have a campus that supports free speech, we will strip all federal money from your university. What? I mean, this is a crazy proposal, but this is exactly what Milo would want to have happen, because his entire agenda is, now we can change it. We can say, if we were more conservative, we could say, it's not about Milo at all. It's about being at UC Berkeley, one of the most left-wing campuses in the United States. Like one of the most, I mean, this is like where some crazy socialists hang out and go to school, right? And that place is full of all the liberal foreign professors work there. And it's about them and the fact that they do not like Milo, or they don't want to hear a speech of this nature, or they disagree with his methods or something like that. Right? So I can use these terms, Burke said, and I can change and get different perspectives on what it was about if I want to move people's attitude around or account for motives. I can use this to account for Milo's motives, or the motives of UC Berkeley, or the motives of the alt-right, because we can even say the agent is the alt-right, and the act is sending Milo there. Or the agent is Breitbart, and they send Milo there. And they knew this would be destructive, and they, da-da-da-da, this kind of thing. But as far as debate society's reaction to it, whenever these kind of things come up, I always think maybe it would be interesting to sort of have a debate about it, so that we can see what we don't know about it. I think that the epistemic view of debate, or if we put the debate as epistemic as the primary principle of debating, then we have a sort of an obligation that comes forward to be like, if I don't know, then I'm going to debate about it first. And then we can all say, wow, what was missing from my speech? Okay, now let's go look it up. Let's go to the library, because now we have an agenda. So it's the backwards way that most people think you should prepare for debate. Read and know all this stuff. and then deploy it in the debate. But I kind of feel like I don't trust myself to know what I don't know. But a debate will definitely show you what you don't know. But as far as what universities should do, I mean, I'm not a firm believer in like a totalizing kind of free speech attitude on campus. I feel like the university project means that some kinds of speech ought to be more privileged than others. And I certainly don't think that somebody who doesn't have, personally, somebody like Milo who doesn't really have a kind of a kind of verifiable kind of academic agenda should be speaking there really at all. I don't understand the point of that. But there are other people who are firm free speech believers who are like, that was the wrong thing to happen, even if he's the most atrocious person. You should just let him speak there. And people disagree quite a bit. All my students disagree about that event and what it's about. But the alt-right presence on the university campuses is increasing. There are more and more people trying to start sort of neo-Nazi kind of clubs and things like this. So it's a problem that people are going to have to face and say, what are the limits of free expression here? And why is this not free expression? And this kind of stuff. I don't know if that deals with your question very well. I don't know a lot of specifics about it, but he went on television and said, yeah, this is exactly what I expected would happen. Most modern universities, the students are taught that there's only one right way to speak and one right way to think, and the liberal universities indoctrinate people, and da-da-da-da-da-da, this kind of thing. He goes on and on. So the Berkeley thing was perfect for him. Perfect for him. That was the perfect result. That's what he wanted. He doesn't really want to speak. And this speaks to persuasion as being something that is a lot more complicated than our sort of enlightenment view of providing rational reasons to a rationally motivated subject through words. It's like, if I can make you identify with something. This is another Burkean idea that persuasion is about identification. If I can make you want to be a certain kind of person, then I don't have to make a lot of rational arguments at all. You're going to already be motivated to be that kind of a person. So these discourses circulate quite a bit, and they also explain a lot about national politics. It's like, well, all these things are actually detrimental to your economic status, to your personal status, to your future career, but still you vote for this party. You're like, well, I think of myself as that kind of a person. Right? I'm like, my relatives, George W. Bush is terrible, terrible, terrible. You can't think that way. Yeah, but he's really kind of familiar to, he's the kind of guy you want to have a beer with. And I'm like, that doesn't seem like a good qualification for president to me. But for people, it's all a lot about, like what you're saying, feelings. But Burke talked about this as identification. In the Freudian sense, like the child wants to be their father. The child wants to be the head of the household. They want to be in charge.
Yeah.
And it's not until they grow up a little bit that they realize they can't be. But for a while, they sort of cling to this fantasy of like, oh, I really just want to be. You play with a little kid. They're like, I want to be the dad, and you get to be the baby. And then they just take you through these arbitrary. Go to bed, wake up, eat. You have to sit here, and then they want you to disobey so they can punish you. It's all part of the game. And a lot of this is what Burke is saying. This is how persuasion works: is people want to be a certain kind of person, or they want to be someone, or like someone, or like a type. And that's how rhetoric works, more than logical reasons. It's kind of not as influential in that theory. And that was written in the 50s. So, I mean, after World War II, you have a lot of stuff coming out saying, how did the Nazis happen? We're so good at logic. We're so good at reason and rationality. We teach all these courses on the fallacies. How did this happen? And so you have a number of theorists saying, well, instead of going top down, maybe we should go bottom up. Let's go to the bakery. Let's go to the street and see what's convincing people. And so you have a lot of theorists writing books in the 50s, like Burke is one of them, trying to sort of explain that maybe logic and reason and rationality don't explain how people make their daily decisions. And maybe we should model that. So you have the sort of top-down idealists, and then sort of the bottom-up inductive thinkers, and they kind of meet somewhere in the middle and come up with different theories. They're not necessarily opposed to each other, but they kind of negotiate the space. And that's kind of like a little map of argumentation theory at the university level, especially here in Europe, where argumentation theory is huge. There's a conference every month on it. Where scholars are like, here's how people have argued about this issue or that issue. Here's a new theory about this old theorist about probability that we can use. And then you have all the computer science people who are like modeling, the new Turing test is if a system can hold a sustained argument with you, we might have AI. So they go to argumentation conferences like, what's a great view of argumentation? We're like, well, we're still working on it. Like, how could you be, it's thousands of years old, how could you still be working on it?
Yeah, but the context,
it's harder than it looks.
Context of the things and contextualizing the crisis, because in a crisis again, you have anomie, you have redundancy of some rules, and this is how Hitler raised up during an economic crisis.
Yeah.
We have Trumpism now that it has to be also contextualizing when you look at the top. I like your lecture, and I think it's good that you put under the frame of the fire, because the fire, Heraclit from Ephesus said that it's at the basis of creation of the world.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
But the fire, as you say, fanning, I think we have to fan it responsible, and we have to keep it under the control, because fire, it's like a conflict. Conflict and fire, it's good to be on the table. As much you keep it under control, you can heat the house. As much you can keep it under control, you can cook your food. You can even deal with the very heavy things, like with the metal, and then you can modulate it as you want. So the word of the lecture, it might be controlling, debate responsible, and those of your energy and the fire as much is needed for creating something, instead of losing the control and burn the entire house or burn the entire forest.
And we didn't even speak about arson, which might be what Milo is up to.
So
Milo might have more in common with like the Reichstag fire than any other kind of like natural speech event. So let's burn democracy. So yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out so long. I didn't mean for it to be so long.
But this is his debate. Everybody likes to debate.
It was planned for an hour, I think, but like, that's useful for me. I don't know why that was planned.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for all your great